Hello, my name is Chris Leatham, and this is The Economy and You. It's another exciting episode of our show today, and today we have a very interesting guest. Today's guest is Dan Leuck, and Dan works for a couple of different companies. He's been here in Hawaii for a number of years. Dan, say hello and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, thank you for having me. Glad to be here. Briefly, since I returned to Hawaii about 10 years ago, started a company called Akezo that is an interactive design studio married to a software company. And so I serve as the CEO of that company, and we service a lot of local customers like Hawaiian Airlines and the city and state government, as well as national and international clients, including investment banks and marketing agencies and so forth. So that company has spun out another company called Context.
And Context is that's a new startup.
It's a new startup. It's a Hawaii startup. It's 95% here in Hawaii, and Context does social media analytics for finance. So via what's called a fire hose deal with Twitter, we look at over 500 million tweets per day.
Just a few. Just a few tweets. Yes.
And we also
select 500 million tweets.
500 million tweets,
yeah,
and we also look at a lot of traditional media as well. So if somebody writes something in social media, we look to see if that's already been talked about on traditional media, so we can figure out what's differentiated. So we actually look at in excess of that number on a daily basis.
Wow. So now, I saw something that says you also are in Japan. Is that right? That you actually have an office in Japan?
We do.
So, 日本語喋れますか?
はい、でも私の日本語すごく悪い。
Anybody knows what it is, it's really bad. That's great. It's okay. One thing about living in Japan, everybody's so gracious. So even if you speak terrible Japanese, even if you try, they're very.
That's right.
They're just in awe. So.
I can be a source of amusement for Japanese people.
Oh, is that right? Yeah. Well, so you're really doing some interesting things. One of the things that we do on this show is we talk about things that are related to technology. The show's called The Economy and You. In some ways, it's really about the new economy. And one aspect of the new economy is what we're doing in the high-tech ecosystem, how we're developing Hawaii as a place where, as a go-to place for technology. And it sounds like you're a really big part of that, and I just think that's fantastic.
Well, we're working hard at it.
Yes.
I don't know how big a part we are in the grander picture, but we have worked very hard to, obviously, within our own companies to grow our companies, but we've also been very active early on in trying to help foster the innovation ecosystem. And that's a mantra that's been around for a long time, actually. If you look back, going back to the 1960s in a slightly different form, and was sort of reinvigorated in the 80s with companies like Oceanit and others coming up, and then we had a flurry of activity around the Act 221 days, and then we sort of had a little bit of a nuclear winter there, and now it's come back again. And I think it's come back in a good way, and it's exciting to see all the incubators and the accelerators and investment from both kind of the new Hawaii money and the old Hawaii money is kind of coming around as well.
Wow, that's great to see.
It is great to see.
Having worked in the financial space, years ago, about 20 years ago, when I was working in the financial space here in Hawaii, one of the big complaints was that local companies were not investing in new opportunities that were going on in Hawaii, and so that was sort of an area of frustration. But it sounds like today, more and more local companies are realize the importance of technology and the role it's going to play in allowing their business to continue to compete successfully in the marketplace.
Yes, I would agree with that.
Yes. So, but you're working with startups, and I love working with startups. I think startups are just fantastic. We saw these new startups that are getting launched with all these young people with somewhat naive. Some of their ideas are a bit naive, but you know what? The enthusiasm that comes across with that, I think, is just fantastic.
Absolutely.
And we see companies working like Blue Startups and some of the other startups that are working, incubators that are working with young people. And you've been working with some of these companies as well.
We have. So I've been an advisor to Blue Startups, which is a great effort by Hank Rogers, who founded it, and Shanoa Farnsworth, who serves as the managing director, to really find companies that have technology companies that have legs, that have the opportunity to scale, that are here or are willing to come out here and have some presence here, but aren't focused just on Hawaii, are looking to expand on a global scale, and then to enable them through not just capital. There's a lot of talk about capital, and capital is important, but also making sure that you've got the right idea, that you've got the right support from people who've been through that process before,
That's
on
right.
the legal side, on the way things are structured,
Yes.
the accounting, the marketing, all these sorts of competencies that are important. And most people that have a good idea don't have all those competencies.
Well, you've got, and of course, that's one of the challenges, right? I mean, you've got the person who's got the great idea, but maybe they don't have the skill set in order to actually develop the application. So then they've got to go out and find other developers to work with them and actually
Right.
start developing code. And then you need designers who are going to do a good job with the graphic design, because that's all about usability, right? You can have a fantastic idea, but if you don't have usability, it can fall flat.
Yes, I
Yes.
think I can tell you're intimately familiar with that problem. There's a lot of, you do run
Yes.
across, kind of two sorts of founders that have different challenges. One is the guy who has a good business idea but doesn't have a technical co-founder. And most of the local accelerators do require at least one technical co-founder. The other kind is you have a technical person who is the entrepreneur, and they're very good at doing a certain thing, very well, because they have a lot of academic background, or they've worked a long time on the problem, but they don't have the ability to create a user interface that allows people to actually find what they've done useful.
Yes.
And so in both those cases, you need to, the business guy's got to get that technical co-founder, and the technical guy's got to get someone who can help.
And they have to kind of get along with
usable.
each other too, because
Yeah.
That's one of the other challenges. Sometimes personalities clash.
That's true.
Or there's different agendas.
That's true. I mean, partnerships are very much like marriages in a
Yes,
lot of ways.
yes.
And anyone that's has done that a few times is familiar with that, and I think would generally agree with that statement.
But the thing is when you get people with a lot of enthusiasm, they find ways to work together.
Yes.
And we are seeing a lot of things happening now. I think you were talking about Blue Startups is getting ready to start a boot camp.
They have they're taking applications for the spring cohort right now. So if you go to bluestartups.com, you can look at what the criteria is. They're looking for technology companies that can scale, basically. And you can apply on the site, and if you're selected, then you can be part of a cohort. Is basically a group of, you'll hear that term used by not just Blue Startups, but Energy Accelerator and all these other folks. And I know that Don was on your show the other day.
Yes, he was.
So generally, they bring people in for some period of time. In the case of Blue Startups, I believe it's 12 weeks here in Hawaii, and then they do a week in Silicon Valley. And during that time, you are actually at Blue Startups facilities, so they're providing space, they're providing expertise from people in the various professions that I mentioned, there's just a lot of mentorship. Also, they provide access to the networks you need to find experts and capital, the follow-on capital, because you're not going to go the distance on your seed funding.
That's right, yeah. And of course, that's a whole other aspect, is the financing and the funding aspect of this, and luring people to come in and invest money in your idea, because of course, in the beginning, it's fairly high risk.
It is. It's very high risk.
The potential for failure is much higher.
People know that most of the companies, frankly, won't make it. But if a few do, that's huge, and that's okay. That's the way it's set up for this sort of creative, destruction and then rebuilding. And a lot of the companies will have to pivot, and some people might find out that the startup life isn't for them, and that's okay. If just a few of them, have big successes, then it helps. It helps the whole ecosystem.
Well, on an individual level, it requires a great deal of commitment.
It does. It requires a small amount of insanity and fanaticism.
Oh, is that right? Just a little bit of
think
insanity.
so.
I think a little bit more than just a little bit of insanity.
But
it's great. It's a great area, And so you've been working with Blue Startups for with that organization for a while.
I've just been a consultant that comes in when they have bring in a new cohort. They bring in a lot of people. I'm not I don't play a major role. I really come in and talk about my experience in running a software company and working for other companies in the startup space. There are many of us.
Yes.
If you go to the Blue Startups site, you'll see who the main players are and what their backgrounds are. Hank Rogers, of course, is a local celebrity in the tech space. He did very well, and he did it here in Hawaii, and that's great. And so we just need 5 more of him.
Just 5 more.
Yeah.
That's all we need. That's all we need. So. Well, the thing is that your organization's been doing some interesting things, and we've had a couple people who've talked about social media and the value of social media and sort of the changing landscape of advertising or marketing a product or a service today. What's been your experience and sort of the pros and cons of that?
I think that, you know, whether or not social media is effective really depends on what it is you're selling. And some things are massively assisted by doing a spend in the social media space, and some things are less so. You know, I'd say it's widening over time, but still, if you're a person that is trying to sell, for example, a software as a service product, you know, you're probably going to have an easier time reaching people through social campaigns than if you have a new accounting firm. So, you know, you have to make sure that social is right for you, but if it is, it can be very effective for not just selling things, and it can be very effective for that, but also recruiting. We use social media very heavily in our recruiting efforts. And
when you're
PR,
recruiting,
customer service, there's so many different aspects to it.
Is that part of sort of brand management or brand reputation management as well?
Yes, and we do some of that. A lot of times in the social media space, the kind of work that we do for customers are when they have some unique thing they're doing, like an actual application that's doing something with social data coming from Twitter or Facebook or those sorts of things.
Okay.
And we build apps that integrate with those social media providers. We're not a company that really you know, deals with more of the as you get into the, you know, a lot of the campaign management or the soft side of that. We're a little closer to the metal in terms of social media.
But you're actually working and developing third-party applications that work against a lot of the social media platforms that are out there. Is that what you're doing?
We do. For example,
Twitter?
Yes. So Context does have a Firehose deal with Twitter, and
yes.
we look at the entirety of the Firehose every day, everything that's written.
That must have been. How long did you work on that project, or how long has it been since the inception of that concept?
It's been over 2 years, and we just had the announcement and the general accessibility release last month.
Wow.
So it's been a long time coming. You have to deal with building the infrastructure to support a big data application.
That's right.
And then all the algorithmic work to do things like figure out whether or not somebody's saying something interesting, and if they're saying something interesting, are they reputable? And what are their connections in the social network, and all kinds of other things.
So now, are you leveraging cloud technology for all of this?
We are.
You are?
Yes.
So how have you found that? Have you found that
It
challenging? Or?
Not, you know, it was very comfortable because Akeso's been doing cloud work on Amazon from the very early days, and we're involved in some of the first cloud apps that happened here, and cloud apps for government as well. So when we started, it's cloud native. Context is a cloud native platform. We didn't migrate it from something that was running on a server in a closet to the cloud.
You just started building it in the cloud.
It was always built and designed for the cloud.
Okay.
It kind of had to be, because you wouldn't want to try to, you know, build your own system on your own hardware for something that's going to handle that level of data.
Kind of that load.
Exactly.
Wow, that's amazing. So now one of the aspects of the cloud that I think there's been some confusion about is the concept of security.
Yes.
A lot of people are under sort of the misnomer that the cloud isn't secure, but quite frankly, I believe the cloud was sort of built around security.
It is, and so I've written about this on TechHui a number of times, and the fact of the matter is, you know, no security is perfect, but the cloud is almost always more secure than what you're currently doing, is what we tell customers, and I think that we can support that very strongly. You know, if you look at a company like Google or Amazon, they have their cloud, the cloud part of their businesses have everything to lose. If they have major data breaches and people lose confidence in them, you know, you have the security of the fact that a company worth hundreds of billions of dollars will lose their revenue if they have a breach. And that creates a very high level of security. So, you know, Google, Amazon, Joyent, these guys, they have security teams that include people with training and that have specialized in this their whole lives. They did their PhDs on this.
And that's their area of expertise.
That's their area of expertise.
Well, we're going to go to a commercial,
okay.
And then we'll come back, and I want to talk a little bit more about this, and then we're going to talk about some other interesting aspects of social media. This is Chris Leatham and The Economy and You. Our guest today is Dan Leuck. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned.
Aloha, my name is Kenneth Lawson. I'm your host here at Life in the Law. I'm really interested in law as I practiced it for 18 years before coming to Hawaii. I practiced criminal law and civil rights law on the mainland. Now I teach law at the University of Hawaii Law School, William S. Richardson School of Law, and I bring in guests who are very current on legal issues that affect your life here in Hawaii. Come and join me every Wednesday at 1 p.m. as we explore how the law affects you, how the law is changing, and why it's important that you should care about what's going on in your community. See you then.
Hi, this is Chris Leatham. Our show is The Economy and You, and today's guest is Dan Leuck from Ikezo, and we're talking about cloud computing. We're talking about the security related and how large companies who've invested in cloud computing, of course, have a huge reputation to maintain, and so the cloud is seen as a quite secure environment for developing new applications. Now, do you see the cloud environment continuing to be sort of the default place where people develop software as a service?
I do. I think that the days of companies that are not technology companies having a bunch of servers in their closet are generally coming to an end, which is a good thing. It's getting to be the equivalent of it's a utility at this point, and most companies don't have, unless they're DR Fortress, they don't have generators in the back room.
That's right.
They get their electricity from the electricity company.
That's right.
So, these cloud providers are very, very good at building large, scalable, reliable systems that have redundancy, multiple geographic redundancy and all these other features that are very hard to build out on your own.
Well, and the thing is, I found, I started developing my own applications in the cloud and in virtual environments, which I have to say is really wonderful because then you can configure the environment any way you want to, and you can scale it up as you need to.
Right, exactly.
Which you don't really have the ability to do that with hardware.
Right.
Where within the cloud you can do that.
Within the cloud, in a
very
minute, you
successfully.
can spin up a new instance, a new, a space where your application can run by flipping a switch.
Yes.
When you have that kind of flexibility, it makes it easier to concentrate on what the important thing that you do, actually writing software, doing the user experience design, these things, and not on do I have the latest patch for this or that? What's going on with this physical box? The fan is broken. These
or your hard drive is failing.
Yeah, exactly. The
These
media
last
is
2 weeks I've
failing.
had 2 hard drives fail, so I was just like, I can't even believe I've had 2 hard drives fail. Such a short period of time. What's the odds of that happening?
Right.
So, but yes, when you have your own laptop computers, they fail, and you have servers, it fails. There's sort of expectation that hard drives will fail after so many hours. There's sort of a law of averages that plays into that kind of thing. So
exactly.
Yeah. So when you get into cloud computing, you don't have those issues because that's all being managed behind the scenes for you.
That's being managed. That's Google's problem.
Yeah,
or
yeah.
Amazon
we'll
or Joyent or whatever cloud you're using. Microsoft.
Yeah. This is really great stuff. I really think that this is an area of real growth for Hawaii, is to continue to develop in the high-tech community. We were talking to a lady earlier who's working with young girls.
I heard the end of that. I wish I'd heard the whole thing. It sounded very interesting.
Getting more girls involved in technology, it seems to be a challenge. We know now in colleges today that we have a much higher ratio of girls to boys. Our college ratio right now is 2 girls for every guy in our college system.
Right.
And so you would think that would have an impact in the technology space, that you see more girls entering the technology space, but yet we still seem to have some challenges there.
In STEM, they're massively underrepresented.
Yes. And so, I think if any of you people out there have young daughters and you think this would be an area that they might find interesting, I would definitely like to encourage parents to get their daughters involved in the technology space. It's actually, I think it's a really interesting area. It's certainly an opportunity for growth. And more and more businesses today are realizing the importance of technology.
Absolutely, and it's, the thing is too, this is not something that's sort of, this unavoidable thing. There are countries that do a better job of this than the U.S., of having women involved in STEM professions, and there are countries that are worse.
Yes. Well, I heard an interesting statistic, that 25% of the top graduates in China, their top college graduates, 25% of those, actually is a greater number than our entire graduation, people that we graduate from universities in the United States.
Yes.
So that means we need to be working very hard if we want to be able to compete internationally.
You're speaking more generally, not just about women. That's true. In general on STEM, if you look at the drop-off rates for people that declare computer science or computer engineering majors, it's extreme. A lot of people go into computer science, they want to study programming because they want to make games. And that's fine. And maybe you are one of those people that will be successful in that field. They get in and they start and they realize that writing in C is hard, or their algorithms class or the math involved or something is hard, and so they drop out. That's not a thing unique to Hawaii. That's in general in the U.S. a problem. So the number of people that we graduate out of those programs compared to a number of other countries, it's a problem, and it's becoming more acute.
Well, and the other thing is too is LinkedIn, there was a new report that came out of LinkedIn, and it was actually written by a friend of mine. I think he's off to Washington, D.C. to talk about it with some of the politicians over there. But in their study, they found also that a lot of the top developers or people that are coming out of universities around the world are no longer just coming to the United States. They're actually being attracted to work in other places like China, and
Singapore, Shanghai.
Yes.
Yes, that's very true.
We want to continue to be competitive in this space, then we are going to have to do a better job of preparing young people to be successful.
Yes.
And do more to mentor young people who show an interest in this area. And I think there's also an argument to be made, games are great, but there's also a whole myriad of other things that we can do software development. And, from working in biotechnology to developing enterprise software to...
Absolutely, and another thing that's interesting, we were just talking about this in a discussion on a blog post on TechHui. If you build a competence in programming, even if that's not ultimately what you do, there's a decreasing number of professions where understanding programming doesn't help you.
Yes.
Almost, there's whether you end up in the medical field, whether you end up in the legal field, like all these things. If you know how to, at a very basic level, write a script that allows you to just look through a bunch of documents for some particular set of criteria, that will help you. And if you look at medicine, there's so much more software involved in medicine, and it's on a curve.
Yes.
Bioinformatics, if you want to look at an awesome field to get into, bioinformatics is the marriage of programming with molecular biology.
Now, where would people go to find out more
space.
about something like that? Because that is actually quite an interesting an area of study.
I think specifically bioinformatics, or in general these sort of.
Oh, bioinformatics actually is kind of an interesting area. I know for those people that are, for example, I talked to one lady, she was a doctor already, but she decided she wanted to do more than just be a doctor. Well, in her case, she went ahead and went to law school, but I think there's also other areas where people with a background in tech and medicine and other things can go ahead and develop further skills.
Absolutely. If you pair programming with almost any of these things, you become very valuable to companies. So, if you marry software to an understanding of molecular biology, then, all the folks doing drug discovery are going to want you, and a lot of other types of companies. If you marry technology with law, then you're going to be in this, in the intellectual property space, which is this area where there's a never-ending need for people that have both legal and technical competence.
Yes.
You can do this for so many things. So programming is, we now realize, although the education system is lagging on this, it needs to be taught earlier and much more pervasively because it's becoming, there's a shortage of it, and it's foundational to so many other things now.
I remember sort of my first delving into programming was learning how to work with truth tables. Binary logic.
Right.
And I sort of, it seemed really interesting. So as I started getting to binary logic and started to understand this, and it was in a philosophy class of all places I was studying this, but I said, well, this really makes sense to me. Sort of, I guess I have a little bit of an analytical mind, so I thought, well, this makes a lot of sense. And then, but I had always taken program to be sort of higher mathematics, which, I did calculus, but then I got to a point in calculus, I was like, I don't think I'm going to go on any further with this. But then I had to take a Fortran class, and that was sort of my first inroads into programming. I don't know if you ever remember. This is going back many months ago, Fortran programming. But it was, I soon discovered that I had a bit of a knack for programming. And so, because one day I introduced a solution to a problem, and I did it in so few lines of code, my professor didn't believe it could actually be done in that few lines of code, which I did. So I felt so good, so I was really pumped up after that. And so then I said, okay, I can do this.
Exactly. When I talk to a lot of programmers, it started with something like that. It wasn't that their first experience with programming wasn't when they majored in ICS at UH Manila. It's when they and we had this exact discussion going. So this is really fun to have a continuation of it here. But to program a big track back when they were a kid in the 80s, and they programmed their calculator, and then they got their hands on a TRS-80 and were programming things they saved to a cassette tape. And
that was so cool.
It was.
That was so awesome.
Yeah.
I remember my first computer was a TRS-80 Model 1 upgraded to a Model 3. I had the screen. I had 2 floppy drives over here, and then I had the keyboard, and we had this game on there that we played. That there was the visuals were not really there. It sort of alluded to a visual, but we played that game for hours and hours and hours. And then I started learning BASIC, and I was just hooked. Yeah.
Because you want to hack the game, or you want to make your own game. So I think the key thing there is that you find that for a lot of programmers, it was introduced really early. through things like programmable devices that parents gave to the kids. So, I think if we want to diversify the demographic of people that pursue that kind of profession, it needs to be introduced really, really early.
Yes. Yes.
And so there's great projects right now to do that for kids. There's Scratch from MIT. There's a number of other programming languages and programming environments that have come about recently to help introduce children at a very young age to it. And we have that discussion going right now on the site.
That's fantastic.
And I'm learning from it too. People, just today, someone posted another environment for integrating a game with simple programming. That's really exciting. I just looked at it right before coming over here.
Is that right? Is that right? Wow, how awesome is that? When I was in San Francisco, there was we were having a meetup. If anybody's unfamiliar with meetup.com, it's a great place to meet people who have a common interest. And I always suggest that as a good place to go to start meeting people. If you have an interest or you want to learn more about a particular type of technology, go check it out, meetup.com. But anyhow, in San Francisco, I went to a meetup. And at this meetup, there was a young girl that had been developed from India, had been developing software which allowed students to share homework. So it was an extremely collaborative platform that she had developed. And it was so fascinating because she says, I'm sitting in my dorm room all alone working on this homework, and I feel so isolated. Wouldn't it be great to have other people to talk with? So she developed this application.
That's awesome when it's driven from a need that the inventor has. That's always good.
Yes. Yeah. And she says, all of a sudden, I'm not alone anymore. I've got all these other people who are sitting in their dorms doing the same thing that I'm doing, and now we can collaborate on homework. But, these collaborative environments also create opportunity for people to work together. A lot of times, I think there's a misnomer about software development. People think software development is the sort of one person sitting down in front of a computer and just banging out code on keys. That's, I think, is a great misnomer. And I think that I'm not a nerd. That's not something I could do. I can't do that. I'm a social person.
Coding is very social today.
I think it's incredibly social, and I think that's one of the big misnomers about being a programmer.
Absolutely.
Or a software developer.
In fact, if we see resumes come across of people who have always been the only person on a software project, we would view that person with great suspicion. Almost all significant things that are done today are done with social coding, heavy collaboration. It's now finally being taught in the schools. That there was a big lag, and you got where we would have guys that came out and they were really good on algos and in other areas, but they couldn't work in groups. They wanted to be alone in their closet, programming away.
Sit down in the basement and write code.
So we want to say, where's the code you shared on GitHub? Where are your open source projects, your collaborative projects? So if you're looking to get employed, nothing creates greater confidence than someone that's gone onto GitHub and put something out there for everyone to see and open themselves up to that criticism and that feedback. And it's always painful in the beginning when people come in and explain to you that you're not as good as you think you are. But that's such a healthy, great exercise. And then you learn and you get to the point where you're really able to compare yourself to other people on the glable platform.
That's actually a great idea. As a developer, it's one of the things that I haven't done is actually put a bunch of code out there for other people to look at. So I probably need to do that. Maybe that'll help. Well, this is Chris Leatham, and this show is called, I'm Chris Leatham. This show is called The Economy and You, and we're going to take a commercial break. We'll be right back. Thank you.
Hi, I'm your host on Think Tech Asia, Bill Sharp. I look forward to you joining us each Monday between 4 and 5 o'clock when we film right here in our studio in downtown Honolulu. The show, Think Tech Asia, focuses on contemporary events in Asia. And by Asia, we mean anything from Hawaii, south to Australia and New Zealand, west to Pakistan, and as far north as the Russian Far East. Clearly, this is one of the most economically dynamic centers of the world, and we bring you up to date on what's going on in a whole host of countries in this very vital region. We look forward to seeing you. Aloha.
Hi, welcome back. This is Chris Leatham. Our show is The Economy and You, and today's guest is Dan Leuck. Dan is from Ikezo, and we've been talking about the sort of how people sort of get started with programming and get involved in developing software and the environment and what's happening with it. We thought we might geek out a little bit and talk about actual programming and some of the sort of pick a language. We're going to talk about C# programming. Sure. C# is a .NET language developed by Microsoft. It has similar syntax to Java. So Java programmers have found it very easy to move over to the C# space. And of course, the language has evolved substantially from .NET 1.1, I think was the
has.
initial version of the language.
It has. It's actually a very nice language. Sometimes, when people have a aggressive anti-Microsoft sort of view of things, they don't take a look at it and appreciate it. But
Yes.
it's created by a language designer who has always been kind of a guy I looked up to, a guy named Anders Heilsberg, who was previously at the developer of, he did Delphi. He created the Delphi language at Borland. He created Objective-Pascal. He created a lot of...
those are languages that are very popular with engineers.
They are.
Yes.
They are. They contribute to develper felicity, as he would say.
I've actually had to work on a couple of Delphi projects, and I can tell you there was a certain level of frustration that I had working with that language. The IDE was completely different, and how you connected to data, and there was a lot of objects. You drag and drop objects. It was very, in that sense, that you could do it and hook things up and make them work, which I guess is very attuned to engineers.
Yes,
Yeah.
and I think he does look to push the edge there and do paradigm shifts and things that sometimes can create a level of discomfort if you're coming from a different paradigm.
Mm-hmm.
I think though he's a very good language designer. Language design is a mixture of art and science, really.
Yes.
And if you look at C#, it's sort of the ultimate evolution of languages in that family. It's kind of what of course he had the benefit of looking back. But it's like C++, but it does all things in the way that you wish C++ would do them.
Yes, well, it does things like Java, where it does memory management. And if anybody's
yes.
ever worked with a computer that's crashed or is frozen, oftentimes that has to do with improper memory management or not the lack of cleaning up of memory. Which, of course, eventually, if you use up all the memory in your RAM, and your computer just stops working, it just locks up, or you've got different things that can cause that, but. Clearly, managing memory is a key component to developing software that doesn't crash and burn.
Exactly. So it does, as you said, it did copy from Java the concept of having a virtualized environment and garbage collection, memory management, these things being managed underneath the program. So it's taken that, and then with the language, it was more sort of aggressive than Java in playing with new language features.
Yes.
And as you mentioned, some things relating to what's called metaprogramming. So being able to define changes to the way that the language works to make it more attuned or natural for a particular domain, and that's called domain-specific programming. All right.
So domain-specific programming, of course, allows you to develop code or develop objects or namespaces? Or
It allows you to, so metaprogramming allows you to, let's say that you want to do something like write a program for handling a ticketing system.
Okay.
So you would have a language that would have instructions like purchase ticket, check availability, and it would read more like plain English. So if you are immersed in that industry or that domain, when you look at it, it reads naturally to you.
You mean you wouldn't have like class objects named Donald Duck or Mickey Mouse or things like this? I've seen some pretty bad code out there in my years, and it sounds like to me what you're really doing is you're creating more intuitive language.
Yes, different sort of problems lend themselves to different languages often.
Yes.
Sometimes you want a very structured environment. You're coding in the large and you have a lot of programmers involved. You have to have a lot of structure and sort of control. And sometimes you need something that's quick and scripty, and it's something for a particular purpose that maybe you write once and use a few times and throw away. That's a different set of parameters. And when you're in a certain industry or domain, there can be things that make the language read more naturally when you are operating within that domain, and that's where you get into DSLs.
So is that when you're developing DSLs, and by the way, folks, this is getting really geeky, but this is really great stuff for programmers. But when you're developing these types of these domain scripted language, we call domain-specific language components, you're building them out so that you can share them with other developers.
Yes, you're building something that allows people in the group to be able to work within that domain-specific language. And a lot of times you have people that are kind of business programmers, where they're people that really have expertise on the business side, but have learned enough programming that they are useful, sort of in between as that liaison, and they'll be able to consume that code much more readily than something that's, like C, for example. I did quickly want to point out too, metaprogramming's been around for a while.
Yes.
So there's a lot of other languages that have done it. But some of the newer languages are taking a different approach to it, an approach that incorporates what we've learned over the past 40 years in doing this sort of thing.
Well, with for example, C#, they've added a lot of different types of extensions and capabilities to the language
Yes.
over the years. I remember when it was a very basic language, and it wasn't typed, wasn't strongly typed initially.
Well,
you could write you could make things strongly typed, but you didn't have to write it that way.
The typing system in C# is a very involved subject.
Yes.
It actually, in the beginning, it was strongly typed, but it had something called type inference, which allows you to write things that don't look like they have types, but the compiler figures out what the type is.
Yeah, that's right. There you go.
And
That's a good way to describe it. Yeah.
And but it looks untyped. And then what they've now more recently introduced is actual dynamic types that work like a Python or a Ruby type, where you can ad hoc, throw methods onto instances of things. So it has both static typing that isn't always apparent that it's there because type inferencing allows you to omit the types and make things more terse and more easily readable, but it also does have a truly dynamic type that behaves, for example, like a Python or Ruby object. So it has the most advanced type system, I would say, that I've seen.
And you can add, and then of course, a few years ago, Microsoft started moving away from the original data connectivity model, which was ADO.NET.
They've done that several times.
Yes, and they've made different attempts at that. And of course, this is all very interesting. And one of the things about programming is that because it's always changing, it's evolving. You need more than just a work ethic. You need to have a study ethic as well.
You do. Programming is not something where you can learn it when you're 20 and then just keep doing what you've been doing for the rest of your career. And there are, not to imply that any profession is exactly like that, but there's certain professions that require fewer updates. With programming, you really have to be on top of. You have to be a constant, lifelong learner to maintain any sort of career in that profession. But that's good. I mean, that's healthy for your brain.
That's healthy for your brain. And one of the joys of that is that you don't get bored. I think is that you're constantly learning and you're developing and you're learning new tricks and things like that. So if you're somebody who, I don't want to say ADD, but you get bored easily, and you want to have a career path where you're constantly being challenged and sort of have an opportunity to keep trying new things, I think programming is actually a great area for people to get involved in.
I agree. And if you're at a company where you are not being challenged or you feel like you've been doing the same thing for 5 years, you haven't learned any new languages or frameworks, you might want to start looking around.
Yeah. I think that's inherently programmers will move from one company to another or move from one project to another because they want that. They want that continual opportunity to expand and develop their skills.
It's true that they tend to be more peripatetic sort of in the programming space. I think also you have certain companies that are better at staying agile, and they're obviously going to retain people longer. But in general, people do move around more.
Yes. But and again, sometimes though that injects new blood and people with new ideas into a company, which is also great for an organization.
Absolutely.
It keeps organizations from becoming sort of complacent.
Yes, there can be a staleness if you have no flow.
Yes,
that's true.
Yes. Well, I wanted to talk a little bit about what your company does because you came on the show, and I'd like to find out a little bit more and have you talk a little bit about what your company is doing and sort of where you're going from here.
On the Ikezo side or Contix or?
Ikezo. I'd like to let's talk about Ikezo a little bit.
So Ikezo, we are primarily a services company, although we do some dual licensing of open source projects. Ikezo, we have some exciting projects starting this year for some startups that I'm really excited about. We can't talk about them yet, and I look forward to being able to talk about them. But we have diversified more. We used to deal a huge portion of what we did really came from the finance side, worked for banks. And that's great work, and that's work that we will continue to do and grow. But we've diversified into working with a lot of different kinds of companies in areas like energy, travel and tourism. And so I think that's kind of like the overarching story with Ikezo is diversifying, which is good in terms of having constant exciting challenges where after anyone has hard problems that we can solve. And
so so for looking for new clients, for example, the client has a challenge, say they're they need to develop an enterprise solution for managing, like one of the last software packages I developed was a logistics management package. Would you be somebody that would come in and help them develop something along those lines?
Yes, we do. We do absolutely do that sort of thing. We are very interested in things in biotech. Because they have a lot of hard problems. And they have problems. They have a lot of challenges, not just from like the heavy computer science side, but they have a lot of user interface challenges. If you're trying to find a good way to to move through a genetic or or proteomics database and find things and annotate them and search them. There's a lot of user interface challenges, and we love those sorts of things in those kinds of domains.
And that is actually, those are very cool problems to solve.
They are.
And once you solve a problem like that, then that's something that something else that you can push out there.
Absolutely.
And other people sort of learn from that and go, okay, I can apply what he did over here. I can apply that to some software that I'm working on over maybe on the other side of the planet.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And then and a lot of people are doing really interesting things in the mobile space now. And Internet of Things. We like things in the Internet of Things space and have been doing
Yes.
a number of projects in
Yes.
that area. So it's software is everywhere now. It's in all kinds of devices and it's all connected.
And there's a gentleman who I believe he's out at the either Mililani or one of the technical parks here who's just developed a new sort of microchip that is infinitesimally small.
TrueTag.
TrueTag, that's it, TrueTag. Great product, great idea.
Absolutely.
He spent years working on this.
Yes.
And now it's very exciting. It's coming to fruition, and he has actually got a product to take to market.
They've been very successful in coming up with interesting technology, forming capital, and now getting customers. They even do manufacturing in Hawaii, which I think is interesting.
Well, that's great.
So yeah, they're a very interesting company.
So, one of the great things again is one of the things that we really want to promote on the show is that we need here in Hawaii to develop our ecosystem of technology, and there is a lot of room. We are really sort of in the beginnings, not at the end. And so, if you're a company, if you are looking or you have ideas, or you have questions about what you could be doing to enhance your company's, business processes. Ikezo might be a company that you'd want to talk to. So they're also available. You have a tweet or a Facebook page?
Yes, it's Leuck. My last name is hard to spell. It's DLEUCK. And Ikezo, if you go to ikezo.com or TechHui, techhui.com is easy. You can find me there, and it has all my Twitter information and other social media handles.
Okay, excellent. Well, we've been doing, you've been working on Context. Now, you've been working on Context, you said, a couple of years.
Yes.
To get this going, and this is one with the Twitter feeds. Now, who would be your client for something like that? Who would be your customer?
A hedge fund, investment bank, or investment management company.
So more about institutional money management firm.
We have been traditionally very focused on institutional traders. We have just come out with something that's focused on the very active individual trader.
Okay.
So, and that information is all up on the site right now, contix.com, context.com. So we have products that are focused sort of toward the, it's upmarket, but it's for individual investors and traders. And then we have the institutionally focused product.
That's pretty amazing. That sounds like you guys have put a lot of work into that. But I'm sure you're not done yet.
No, we've put a lot of work in it, and we're still very early.
Yes.
But we're getting there.
Well, that's awesome. I find that the more that you work in this space, the more people that you meet, the more interesting the work becomes.
Yes.
And it's just so exciting.
That's true. I agree.
Do we have a picture of their website? I think I'm not sure if we have a picture, but yeah. Okay.
I'm happy to talk to them if we have one. If not,
I think she's going to put up a picture.
I could do some interpretive dance to describe it.
It's but we've talked about some really great issues today. We've talked about what you all are doing. We've talked about some of the analytical issues. And we've talked about the importance of having young people get involved in the world of software development.
Absolutely.
There we go. We've got a nice little picture there.
Okay, this is ikezo.com, so this is our website. And
so what was the inspiration on that, by the way?
The inspiration was basically showing the things that we do, which we design, and that's sort of represented here in the, I'm sorry, I'm having to look at the site. It's represented by the top portion, and as you dig down, it's a Da Vinci vehicle that evolves from the flying machine to the drilling machine. And it's in the design space. It drills down through the ocean into the middle of the earth where you see the engineering, the gears and things happening, and pops out on the other side of the world which represents our localization capabilities.
Yeah.
So that's the sort of concept behind the site.
And so who do you have internal developers or designers who are working on things all the time?
Yes, we have. They're full-time team members. They're all right here in Hawaii in our office at the Kapiolani Business Plaza. Mm-hmm. So for local customers, we can't escape from you. You can always come and knock on our door. We have a design team and we have a development team. They sit right next to each other. in that building. And we have a few remote people, but we're also about 95% local.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Dan. Thank you very much for coming
Thank
on the
you.
show
It's a
today.
pleasure
We love
meeting
to
you.
having you. I'm Chris Leatham. This is The Economy and You. It's been a great show. It's been very interesting, I have to say, on my behalf. And
Likewise.
I look forward to seeing you next week.